Mary Catherine held her 6-year-old son closer to her chest as the blizzard raged outside their small cabin. Little Thomas was burning with fever, his small body shaking despite the thick quilts wrapped around him. The winter of 1847 had been the harshest anyone in their small Texas settlement could remember, and now it seemed determined to take everything she had left in this world. The cabin creaked and groaned under the force of the wind, and snow found its way through every crack. In the walls, Mary Catherine had stuffed rags into the gaps, but the bitter cold still crept in, making their single room feel like an ice cave. The fire in their stone hearth was dying down, and she knew they had only a few more pieces of wood left. Her husband, John, had left 3 days ago to hunt for food, promising to return before the storm hit. But the blizzard had come earlier than anyone expected, bringing with it winds that could knock a grown man off his feet in snow, so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Mary Catherine tried not to think about what might have happened to him out there in the wilderness. Thomas coughed again, a wet, rattling sound that made Mary Catherine's heart break a little more each time she heard it. The boy's lips were blue, despite the fever, and his breathing was becoming more labored with each passing hour. She had given him every remedy she knew, every herb and medicine they had in their small collection, but nothing seemed to help. The nearest doctor was 40 miles away in Austin, and even if the weather had been perfect, it would take 2 days to reach him. With the storm raging outside, that journey was impossible. Mary Catherine was completely alone with her dying child. Watching helplessly as the sickness consumed him, she began to sing softly, the same lullaby her own mother had sung to her when she was small. Her voice was rough from crying, but she forced herself to keep the melody gentle and soothing. Thomas always calmed down when she sang to him, and even now, in his fevered state, she could see his face relax slightly at the familiar tune. "Hush now, my baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby," she whispered, stroking his damp hair. "Close your little eyes and rest. Mama's love will do the rest." The wind howled louder, and Mary Catherine pulled Thomas even closer. She could feel how thin he had become over the past few days, how his little body seemed to be disappearing before her eyes. The thought of losing him was unbearable. She was beginning to accept that there might be nothing more she could do. Their small settlement consisted of only 12 families, scattered across several miles of rough Texas frontier. The nearest neighbors, the Williamson family, lived almost a mile away, and with this storm, they might as well have been on the other side of the world. Everyone would be huddled in their own homes, fighting their own battles against the cold and wind. Mary Catherine had been born in Virginia, where winter storms were gentler affairs that brought snow, but not this killing cold. When she and John had decided to move west to Texas, seeking land and opportunity, she had never imagined anything like this. The frontier was harsh in ways she was still learning, demanding sacrifices she had never expected to make. The fire popped and hissed as moisture from the logs turned to steam. Mary Catherine knew she would have to add more wood soon, but she was reluctant to leave Thomas's side even for a moment. Every breath he took seemed like it might be his last, and she wanted to be holding him if the worst happened. She continued singing, switching to another song she remembered from her childhood. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Her voice cracked on the high notes, but she kept going. "I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." Thomas stirred in her arms, his eyes opening briefly to look at her face. For just a moment, he seemed more alert, more like himself. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I'm here, baby Mary," Catherine said, kissing his forehead. "Mama's right here with you. Are we going to die?" Thomas asked. The question that had been haunting Mary Catherine's thoughts for hours. She forced herself to smile, even though her heart was breaking. "No, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. Papa will be home soon, and this storm will pass, and everything will be all right." But even as she spoke the words, Mary Catherine wasn't sure she believed them. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Thomas was getting weaker by the hour. Their food was running low, their wood supply was almost gone, and she had no idea when John would return, or if he was even still alive. The wind changed direction. and she heard a new sound mixed in with its howling. For a moment, she thought it might be John calling out, trying to find his way home through the storm. But as she listened more carefully, she realized it was something else entirely. It sounded almost like singing, but not in English. The voice was deep and strong, rising and falling with a rhythm she had never heard before. It seemed to be coming from somewhere near the cabin, but that was impossible. No one would be out in this storm unless they were desperate or lost. Mary Catherine held her breath, straining to hear over the wind. There it was again, that strange singing voice. Closer now. It sounded like some kind of chant or prayer. Words in a language she didn't recognize but somehow found oddly comforting. Thomas had fallen asleep again, his breathing shallow but steady. Mary Catherine carefully laid him down on their bed and moved toward the window, trying to peer through the thick layer of ice that covered the glass. She couldn't see anything through the storm, but the singing continued, seeming to circle around their cabin. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle that hung over their fireplace. Living on the frontier had taught her to be cautious about strangers, especially during times of crisis. But something about that voice, about the steady rhythm of the unknown words, made her hesitate. The singing grew louder, and Mary Catherine realized that whoever was out there was moving closer to her front door. To make sure it was loaded, her hands shaking from more than just the cold, in a few moments, she would discover that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by 3 slow, deliberate knocks on Mary Catherine's door. Her heart pounded as she gripped the rifle tighter, positioning herself where she could see both the door and Thomas on the bed. In all her years on the frontier, she had learned that unexpected visitors during storms usually meant trouble. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady and strong. A man's voice answered, speaking English but with an accent she couldn't identify. "I seek shelter from the storm. My horse is dying, and I cannot travel further." Mary Catherine's mind raced through her options. Opening the door to a stranger could be dangerous, especially with Thomas so sick and John nowhere to be found. Leaving someone outside in this blizzard would be a death sentence. She wasn't sure she could live with that on her conscience. "Are you alone?" she asked. "Yes. I have no weapons in my hands. I mean no harm to you or your family." Mary Catherine noticed he had said no weapons in his hands, not no weapons at all. It was a careful choice of words that made her even more cautious. But Thomas coughed again, a terrible sound that reminded her how desperate their own situation was becoming. "Step back from the door," she commanded. "I'm going to open it, but I have a rifle pointed at you." She heard footsteps moving away from the entrance and slowly unlatched the heavy wooden door. The wind immediately tried to rip it from her hands, and snow swirled into the cabin like a living thing. Through the white chaos, she could see a tall figure standing about 10 feet away, barely visible in the storm. The man was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with long black hair that whipped around his face in the wind. His skin was dark, weathered by sun and cold, and his clothes were a mixture of leather and fur that looked both practical and foreign. Most striking of all were his eyes, which seemed to glow with an inner fire even in the dim light. "You're a Comanche," Mary Catherine said. Not really a question, but a statement of recognition. She had heard descriptions of the fierce warriors who controlled much of the Texas frontier, though she had never seen one in person. The man nodded slowly. "I am called Storm. I hunt alone when the winter brings visions." Mary Catherine kept the rifle trained on him, though something about his calm demeanor made her feel less threatened than she had expected. "What do you want here?" "Your child is sick," Storm said, and Mary Catherine's blood ran cold. How could he know about Thomas? "I heard you singing the death songs. The spirits told me to come." "They're not death songs," Mary Catherine protested, though a part of her wondered if that was exactly what they had become. "They're lullabies to comfort him." "All songs can be death songs when sung with a breaking heart," the Comanche replied. "May I enter? Storm will kill us both if we stand here much longer." Against her better judgment, Mary Catherine stepped aside and let him in. Storm moved with surprising grace for such a large man, and she noticed that, despite the terrible conditions outside, he barely seemed affected by the cold. He looked around the small cabin, taking in every detail with sharp, intelligent eyes. His gaze lingered on Thomas. And Mary Catherine saw something unexpected in his expression, genuine concern. "How long has he been sick?" Stan Sinstrom asked. "For days," Mary Catherine replied, still holding the rifle, but no longer pointing it directly at him. "The fever started first, then the cough. Now he can barely breathe." The Comanche moved closer to the bed, and Mary Catherine tensed. But Stan Sinstrom simply knelt beside Thomas and placed his hand gently on the boy's forehead. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such large, calloused hands. "Oh, this sickness has taken many children this winter," he said softly. "White children. Indian children, it does not care about the color of skin or the language of prayers. Can you help him?" Mary Catherine asked. The words coming out more desperate than she had intended. Stan Sinstrom was quiet for a long moment, studying Thomas's face and listening to his breathing. Finally, he looked up at Mary Catherine with those intense dark eyes. "Perhaps. But you must trust me, and trust is not something that comes easily between our peoples." Mary Catherine knew he was right. Stories of Comanche raids and settler conflicts filled the newspapers and the conversations of frontier families. These were supposed to be her enemies, people to be feared and fought. But looking at this man kneeling beside her dying son, she saw none of the savage brutality she had been told to expect. "What would you need to do?" she asked. "I carry medicine plants, herbs that grow in the high country where the spirits are strong. But preparation takes time, and the child must be kept warm while the medicine works. The fire is dying, and you have little wood left."
"I'll marry a Catherine."
Mary Catherine glanced at their dwindling wood pile and felt a wave of despair, even if this stranger could help Thomas. They might all freeze to death before morning. But Stan Sinstrom smiled slightly, the first time his stern expression had softened. "I know where there is shelter from this storm, a place with wood and warmth, but it would mean trusting me to lead you through the blizzard." "Where?" Mary Catherine asked. "A cave in the rocks, 1/2 mile from here. My people have used it for generations when winter storms trap us in this area. There is wood stored there, and the cave stays warm even when the world outside turns to ice." The idea of leaving their cabin, their home, filled Mary Catherine with fear. But she looked at Thomas, saw how pale and still he had become, and knew that staying here meant watching him die. At least with this Comanche hunter, there was a chance, however small. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "how do I know you won't harm us? How do I know this isn't some kind of trap?" Stan Sinstrom reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a small carved object, holding it out for her to see. It was a tiny horse, no bigger than her thumb, carved from what looked like bone, and decorated with intricate symbols. "This belonged to my son," he said quietly. "He died 3 winters ago from the same sickness that takes your boy now. I could not save him because I did not know the right medicine. Since then, I have learned. I will not let another child die if I can prevent it." Mary Catherine stared at the small carving, seeing the pain in the warrior's eyes as he spoke of his lost child. In that moment, she realized that despite their different worlds, different languages, different ways of life, they were both parents who had loved and lost and feared. "All right," she said, lowering the rifle completely. "Tell me what we need to do." Stan Sinstrom moved with swift efficiency, gathering supplies while Mary Catherine wrapped Thomas in every blanket and quilt they owned. The boy was barely conscious, his breathing so shallow she had to put her ear close to his mouth to make sure he was still alive. The Comanche warrior watched her careful movements with approval. "You are a good mother," he said simply. "Your child knows this, even in his sickness." Mary Catherine felt tears threaten to overwhelm her, but she pushed them back. There would be time for crying later, if they all survived this night. Right now, she needed to be strong for Thomas. Stan's dash and storm had somehow managed to bring his horse close to the cabin door, despite the raging storm. The animal was magnificent, a paint horse with markings that seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. Steam rose from its nostrils, and its dark eyes held an intelligence that reminded Mary Catherine of its master. Name is Windwalker, Storm explained as he secured their supplies to the saddle. He was born in a storm like this. 1. He knows how to find paths through the white death when other horses would become lost and die. Mary Catherine had never ridden with a Comanche warrior before, and the thought terrified her almost as much as losing Thomas. But when Storm lifted her son as gently as if he were made of spun glass, she saw that there was no other choice. I will carry the boy, the warrior said. You ride behind me and hold him steady. Windwalker is strong enough for all three of us, and we must not be separated in the storm. The moment they stepped outside, the full fury of the blizzard hit them like a physical blow. The wind was so strong that Mary Catherine could barely keep her footing, and the snow was falling so thickly that she couldn't see more than a few inches in any direction. The cold cut through her clothes like knives, making her gasp and shiver uncontrollably. But Storm seemed unaffected by the brutal conditions. Mounted Windwalker with Thomas cradled in one arm, then reached down to help Mary Catherine up behind him. The horse didn't even shift under their combined weight, standing rock steady in the howling wind. Hold tight, Storm called over the storm. Trust Windwalker to find the way. Do not try to guide him with your fear. They moved into the white darkness, and Mary Catherine quickly lost all sense of direction. The world had become a swirling void of snow and wind, with no landmarks, no reference points, nothing but the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the solid warmth of Storm's back against her chest. Thomas was sandwiched between them, his small body protected from the worst of the wind, but still frighteningly cold. Mary Catherine could feel his labored breathing against her arm, could sense how much weaker he was becoming with each passing moment. She began to sing again the same lullabies as before, though her voice was nearly lost in the storm. Storm heard her singing and added his own voice, harmonizing with her melody in that strange, beautiful language she had heard before. Their voices blended together in a way that seemed to push back against the chaos of the storm, creating a bubble of warmth and comfort around Thomas. The journey felt like it lasted hours, though Mary Catherine knew it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. Windwalker never stumbled, never hesitated, moving through the blizzard with supernatural confidence. Several times, Mary Catherine was sure they were walking straight into a wall of rock or a deep ravine, only to find that the horse had found a safe path she couldn't see. Finally, the wind began to lessen slightly, and Mary Catherine realized they were moving into some kind of shelter. Through the swirling snow, she could make out the dark mouth of a cave opening in the rock face ahead of them. Storm guided Windwalker directly into the entrance. And suddenly, they were out of the storm. The cave was larger than Mary Catherine had expected, with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadows and walls that seemed to have been carved smooth by centuries of wind and water. Most importantly, it was warm. Not just warmer than outside, but genuinely warm, as if heated by some invisible fire. How's it so warm in here? Mary Catherine asked as Storm helped her down from the horse. Hot springs, he explained, pointing toward the back of the cave. The earth bleeds warm water here, and people have known of this place for many generations. It has saved countless lives during the harsh winters. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Mary Catherine could see that the cave had been used as a shelter many times before. There were neat stacks of firewood along one wall, sleeping areas marked out with stones, and even some basic supplies stored in natural alcoves in the rock. Storm quickly built a fire near the cave entrance, the flames providing both light and additional warmth. The smoke was drawn upward and out through cracks in the ceiling, leaving the air clear and breathable. Mary Catherine had never been more grateful for warmth and safety. She laid Thomas on a bed of soft furs that Storm produced from somewhere in the cave's depths. The boy's skin was now almost translucent, and his breathing had become so quiet she could barely detect it. Time was running out, and she knew it. Now we begin the real work, Storm said, unpacking a leather pouch filled with various plants and herbs. Some of these plants are familiar to your people, others are known only to medicine men of the Comanche. Together, they may be strong enough to pull your son back from the spirit world. Mary Catherine watched as he began preparing his medicines, grinding roots between stones, mixing leaves with water heated over the fire, creating combinations that filled the cave with strange but somehow comforting scents. His movements were precise and ritualistic, as if he had done this many times before. "Tell me about your son," Mary Catherine said softly as he worked. "The one who died." Storm's hands paused for just a moment, then continued their careful preparations. His name was Little Eagle. He was 7 winters old, brave and strong like his father, but gentle like his mother. When the sickness came to our village, that winter, I was away hunting. By the time I returned, it was too late. "I'm sorry," Mary Catherine said, and meant it. "His death taught me that strength in battle means nothing if you cannot protect those you love from invisible enemies. Spent 2 years learning the medicine ways, traveling to distant tribes, seeking the knowledge that might have saved him." Storm held up a small clay pot filled with a dark, steaming liquid. "This medicine is made from plants that grow only in the high mountains, where the spirits are closest to the earth. It is bitter and strong, but it can drive away the sickness that steals children's breath." Mary Catherine looked at the strange concoction, then at her dying son. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then at least we will have tried everything," Storm replied. "And your boy will cross over knowing that 2 people who cared about him fought to the very end." The warrior's words were both comforting and terrifying, but Mary Catherine knew they had reached the point where hope and desperation had become the same thing. Storm knelt beside Thomas with the medicine pot in his hands, but he didn't immediately try to give it to the boy. Instead, he began to sing in his native tongue, a low rhythmic chant that seemed to make the very air in the cave vibrate. With power, Mary Catherine found herself holding her breath, watching as the Comanche warrior's entire demeanor changed. His eyes closed, and his voice grew stronger, rising and falling with a melody that seemed both ancient and eternal. Mary Catherine didn't understand the words, but she could feel their meaning in her bones. This was a prayer, a plea to whatever spirits governed life and death, a father's anguish transformed into healing power. "What is he saying?" Mary Catherine whispered, though she was almost afraid to interrupt. Storm opened his eyes, but continued the chant for another moment before answering. "I am asking my son's spirit to help guide your son back from the Shadowlands. I am telling the sickness spirits that they have taken enough children, that this one must be allowed to stay with his mother." The idea should have seemed strange. To Mary Catherine, this mixing of Indian spirituality with her own Christian beliefs, but sitting in this warm cave, watching this warrior fight for her child's life with every tool at his disposal, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Now we give him the medicine," Storm said gently. "But you must help me. A mother's love is the strongest magic of all. Hold him while I pour the liquid into his mouth and sing to him. Let him know you are here, that you will not let him go without a fight." Mary Catherine cradled Thomas's head in her lap, stroking his damp hair as Storm carefully tilted the clay pot to the boy's lips. The medicine was dark brown and smelled of earth and bitter roots. Thomas was so weak he couldn't swallow on his own, so the warrior had to massage his throat gently to help the liquid go down. Mary Catherine began to sing the same lullaby she had been singing all evening, but now her voice was joined by Storm's deep bass harmonies. Their voices blended together in a way that transcended language and culture, creating something new and powerful that filled the cave with warmth and hope. At first, nothing seemed to change. Thomas remained still and pale, his breathing so shallow that Mary Catherine had to watch closely to see his chest rise and fall. But gradually, so slowly that she almost missed it, a bit of color began to return to his cheeks. "Is it working?" she asked, afraid to hope too much. "The medicine is strong, but the boy's spirit has wandered far into the Shadowlands," Storm replied. "We must be patient and continue to call him back." They took turns throughout the long night, one of them always singing while the other tended the fire or prepared more medicine. Storm seemed to have an endless supply of different herbs and roots, each one chosen for a specific purpose. In the healing process, as the hours passed, Mary Catherine found herself learning fragments of the Comanche songs, while Storm picked up the melodies of her lullabies. Their voices became so synchronized that it was sometimes hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Around what Mary Catherine guessed was midnight, Thomas stirred for the first time in hours. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked around the cave with confusion and wonder. "Mama," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "I'm right here, baby," Mary Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's right here." Thomas's gaze shifted to Storm, and instead of showing fear at the sight of the imposing Comanche warrior, the boy smiled slightly. "Are you the man with the singing voice?" Storm's stern face softened into something approaching tenderness. "Yes, little one. I have been singing to help drive away your sickness." "It's working," Thomas said seriously. "I feel better. The heavy feeling in my chest is going away." Mary Catherine felt her heart soar with hope, but Storm cautioned. "Patience. The medicine will work for several hours, but the boy is not completely healed yet. We must continue the treatment through the night and into tomorrow." As if to emphasize his point, Thomas fell back into a deep sleep, though his breathing was noticeably easier than it had been before. Mary Catherine covered him with another layer of furs and settled back to continue their vigil. "Tell me about your wife, Mary," Catherine said quietly as they watched Thomas sleep. "Little Eagle's mother?" Storm was quiet for so long that Mary Catherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke in a voice so soft she had to strain to hear him. "Her name was Morning Star. She was the daughter of a medicine man from a distant tribe, and she knew more about healing plants than anyone I have ever met. She could cure almost any sickness, mend any wound, ease any pain. But she could not save our son, and the failure broke her heart." "What happened to her?" "She walked into the river during the spring floods, the year after Little Eagle died. Said it was an accident, that she slipped on the wet rocks. But I knew better. She chose to join our son in the spirit world, rather than live with the pain of losing him." Mary Catherine felt a deep ache in her chest, imagining the terrible grief that had driven a mother to such a desperate act. "I'm so sorry you've lost." "So much loss is part of life on the frontier," Storm said simply, "for your people and mine. The strong survive, the weak perish, and those who remain must find ways to honor the memory of those who have gone before." "Is that why you're helping us? To honor their memory?" Storm considered the question carefully before answering. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the spirits sent me here because they know that some things are more important than the wars between our peoples. Sick child is just a sick child, whether his skin is white or red." The storm outside began to weaken as the night wore on, and by dawn the wind had died to a gentle whisper. But Mary Catherine barely noticed the change in weather. Her entire attention was focused on Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. When the boy woke the next morning, his eyes were clear and bright, and his breathing was almost normal. He was weak from his ordeal, but the terrible fever had broken. The awful cough that had been tearing at his lungs was gone. "I'm hungry, Mama," Thomas said, and Mary Catherine laughed through her tears. "That's the most beautiful thing I've heard in days," she said. Hugging him carefully, Storm produced dried meat and some kind of nutritious cake made from ground roots and berries. Thomas ate slowly but steadily, his appetite returning along with his strength. "How long before he's completely well?" Mary Catherine asked. "Another day or two of rest and medicine, and he should be strong enough to travel home," Storm replied. "Sickness has been driven out, but his body needs time to heal." Mary Catherine looked at this man who had saved her son's life, this supposed enemy who had risked everything to help a stranger's child. She knew that when they returned to her cabin, when her husband came home, when life returned to normal, the world would expect her to see Storm as a threat again. But she also knew that she would never forget what had happened in this cave. Never stop being grateful for the Comanche hunter who had emerged from the white storm to save everything that mattered to her. On the second day in the cave, while Thomas continued to grow stronger with each passing hour, Mary Catherine learned more about Storm than she had ever expected to know about any Comanche warrior. He told her stories of his childhood, his training as a hunter, in his travels across the vast Texas frontier. In return, she shared memories of her own life, her journey from Virginia, and her dreams for Thomas's future. The storm had completely passed, leaving the world outside covered in a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. But neither Mary Catherine nor Storm seemed eager to leave the warmth and safety of the cave. Something had changed between them during their long vigil over Thomas, a bond forged in shared purpose that transcended the hatred between their peoples. "My husband will be looking for us," Mary Catherine said, as they watched Thomas play with small stones near the fire. "He'll be worried sick when he finds the cabin empty." Storm nodded thoughtfully. "My absence from the winter hunting grounds will be noticed as well. My people will send scouts to find me if I do not return soon." They both understood the implications of their words. When they returned to their separate worlds, this friendship would become a dangerous secret. White settlers and Comanche warriors were supposed to be enemies, not allies, who had worked together to save a child's life. "What will you tell them?" Mary Catherine asked. "Your people, I mean? That I found shelter from the storm and helped a lost family," Storm replied. "It is the truth, even if it is not the whole truth." Mary Catherine smiled at his careful choice of words. "And I'll tell John that a hunter helped us, without mentioning that he was Comanche." "That would be wise," Storm agreed. "The peace between our peoples is fragile. There are those on both sides who would use our friendship as an excuse for violence." Thomas, oblivious to the complex adult concerns being discussed around him, had built an elaborate fort out of stones and was making shooting sounds as he played with imaginary soldiers. His recovery had been remarkable, and by afternoon he was almost back to his normal, energetic self. "Mama, when can we go home?" Thomas asked during a break in his play. "I want to show Papa my fort." "Soon, sweetheart," Mary Catherine replied. "We just need to make sure you're completely well first." But she could see that Thomas was indeed ready to travel. His cheeks had regained their healthy pink color. His breathing was completely normal, and his appetite had returned with a vengeance. The medicine Storm had given him had worked better than anything she had ever seen. Throughout the day, Storm continued to teach Mary Catherine about the healing plants he carried in his medicine pouch. He showed her how to identify willow bark for pain relief, how to prepare elderberry extract for fevers, and how to make poultices from various roots that could draw infection from wounds. "Your people have doctors in towns," he explained as he demonstrated the proper way to grind medicinal roots. "But out here on the frontier, every mother should know these things. Sickness and injury do not wait for convenient times." Mary Catherine absorbed every lesson eagerly, knowing that this knowledge could save lives in their isolated community. She made mental notes about which plants grew in different seasons, how to dry and store medicines, and which remedies worked best for common frontier ailments. "In my tribe, the women are the keepers of healing knowledge," Storm continued. "My wife's morning star taught me much of what I know. She said that a warrior who cannot heal is only half complete." "She sounds like a wise woman," Mary Catherine said softly. Yes, she was. "But wisdom could not save her from grief when our son died. Sometimes the heart sickness is harder to cure than any disease of the body." As evening approached on their second day in the cave, Mary Catherine found herself dreading the return to her normal life. Not because she didn't want to see her husband or go back to their cabin, but because it would mean saying goodbye to this remarkable man who had saved her son and opened her eyes to so much. "Storm," she said quietly as they prepared. "Thomas is bedding for the night. I want you to know that I'll never forget what you did for us. If there's ever anything I can do to repay you, ... double quotes. The warrior held up his hand to stop her. "You owe me nothing. I told you before I could not save my own son, but perhaps helping yours has given little Eagle's death some meaning. Still, if our paths ever cross again, if you ever need help, please know that you have friends among the white settlers." "At least you have one friend?" Storm smiled, the expression transforming his harsh features into something warm and kind. "And you should know that not all Comanche are the monsters your people believe us to be. We love our children, just as fiercely as you love yours. We grieve for our losses and celebrate our victories. We are more alike than different. your people and mine. That night, Mary Catherine lay awake listening to the gentle sounds of the cave settling around them. The hot springs bubbled quietly in the depths. Thomas breathed easily in his sleep, and Storm hummed softly as he tended the fire. It occurred to her that this might be the most peaceful she had felt since coming to Texas. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with brilliant sunshine turning the snow-covered landscape into a winter wonderland. Thomas was eager to start the journey home, chattering excitedly about seeing his father and sleeping in his own bed again. Storm packed up his medicines and supplies while Mary Catherine gathered their belongings. The cave that had been their sanctuary for 2 days would return to its quiet waiting, ready to shelter other travelers caught by future storms. Will other people be able to find this place? Mary Catherine asked as she took one last look around. Their refuge. Those who truly need it will find it, Storm replied mysteriously. The spirits guide desperate souls to safety, just as they guided me to you during the storm. Walker seemed as eager to travel as Thomas, stamping his hooves and tossing his head as Storm prepared him for the journey. The paint horse had been a perfect companion during their ordeal, never complaining about the extra weight or the difficult conditions. Before they left the cave, Storm performed a brief ceremony, speaking words in his native tongue. While sprinkling tobacco on the ground near the entrance, Mary Catherine watched respectfully, understanding that he was offering thanks to whatever spirits had protected them during their stay. What did you say? She asked, as they prepared to. Mount Windwalker. I thanked the cave spirits for their protection and asked them to remember our time here with kindness. Storm explained. I also asked them to watch over Thomas as he grows to manhood, to keep him safe and strong. Mary Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the warrior's thoughtfulness. Even now, as they prepared to part ways forever, she was still thinking of her son's welfare. The ride home would mark the end of one of the most extraordinary experiences of her life. But Mary Catherine knew that the lessons learned in that hidden cave would stay with her always. The meal that followed was unlike anything Mary Catherine had ever experienced. John, initially tense and watchful, gradually relaxed as he listened to Storm speak about medicine plants, hunting techniques, and the natural world. Thomas, completely unaware of the historical significance of the moment, chattered away to their guest as if he were a beloved uncle visiting for the holidays. Storm proved to be an excellent storyteller, sharing tales of his travels across the frontier that were both educational and entertaining. He spoke of hidden valleys where rare healing plants grew, of animal behaviors that could predict weather changes, of natural landmarks that could guide travelers across seemingly empty wilderness. How did you learn to speak English so well? John asked during a pause in the conversation. I spent time as a young man with traders and mountain men, Storm replied. My father believed that knowledge of other languages would make me a better leader for our people. He was wise enough to know that the world was changing, that we would need to understand the white man's ways to survive. Mary Catherine served them cornbread and venison stew, simple frontier fare that Storm praised as enthusiastically as if it were a feast. Few opportunities for hot, well-prepared meals. Tell Papa about the cave, Thomas urged Storm between bites of cornbread. Tell him about the hot springs and the singing. John listened with growing amazement as Storm described the hidden sanctuary where they had sheltered from the storm. The idea of such a place existing so close to their homestead, unknown to the settler families in the area, opened his eyes to how much about this land remained mysterious and unexplored. You said your people have used that cave for generations? John asked. Yes, it is marked on no white man's map, but it has saved many lives during harsh winters. My grandfather's grandfather told stories of sheltering there during storms that lasted for many days. Mary Catherine saw her husband processing this information, beginning to understand that the Comanche had a deep, complex relationship with this land that went back far longer than any white settlement. It was a humbling realization for a man who had thought of himself as a pioneer taming wild country. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation turned to more practical matters. John had indeed been caught in the storm while hunting, forced to take shelter in a makeshift lean-to for 2 days before he could make his way home. He had been frantic with worry when he found the cabin empty and cold. "I thought you might have tried to reach the Williamson place," John admitted. "I rode there first, but they hadn't seen you. Then I started searching in wider circles, following any tracks I could find, but the snow had covered everything. Windwalker is skilled at finding paths that other horses cannot see," Sandstorm said, stroking his horse's neck affectionately. "He has carried me safely through many storms." Thomas had been playing quietly near the fire, but now he approached Sandstorm with something in his small hands. "I made this for you," the boy said shyly, holding out a crude carving he had. Made from a piece of firewood, it was clearly meant to be a horse, though the proportions were childish and the details rough. But Sandstorm accepted it with the same reverence he might show a sacred object, turning it over in his large hands and examining every detail. "This is beautiful, little warrior," he said solemnly. "I will treasure it always." Thomas beamed with pride, and Mary Catherine felt her heart swell with love for both her son and this gentle giant who had saved his life. As evening approached, Sandstorm began to make preparations to leave. The weather was clear, and he wanted to travel while the visibility was good. Mary Catherine felt a deep sadness at the thought of his departure, knowing that this might be the last time they would ever meet. "Before you go," she said, "I want to give you something." She went to their small collection of books and pulled out a leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. It was one of her most precious possessions, but she knew it was the right gift for this remarkable man. "I can't accept this," Sandstorm protested. "It is too valuable." "Please," Mary Catherine insisted. "You saved my son's life. This book contains stories of healing and hope, of people helping strangers in times of need. It seems fitting that you should have it." Sandstorm accepted the Bible with obvious emotion, handling it as carefully as he had Thomas's carved. "Horse, I will learn to read the white man's holy book," he promised. "Perhaps it will help me understand your people better." John stepped forward and offered his hand to the Comanche warrior. "I never thought I'd say this to one of your people, but you're welcome at our table any time. If you're ever in this area again, please stop and visit." Sandstorm grasped John's hand firmly, and Mary Catherine could see that both men understood the significance of the gesture. They were not just shaking hands. They were bridging a gap between two worlds that had been at war for generations. Thomas hugged Sandstorm around the waist, the boy's small arms barely reaching around the warrior's massive frame. "Will I see you again?" Thomas asked. "Perhaps, little warrior," Sandstorm replied, kneeling down to Thomas's eye level. "The world is large, but the spirits have a way of bringing people together when it is meant to be." As Sandstorm mounted Windwalker and prepared to ride away, Mary Catherine felt compelled to speak one final time. "What you did for us, the kindness you showed, it proves that peace between our peoples is possible. Maybe someday." "Maybe someday," Sandstorm agreed, though his expression suggested he had fewer illusions about the likelihood of lasting peace. "But what happened here, in this place, during this storm, will always matter. Thomas will grow up knowing that enemies can become friends, that courage and compassion exist in all peoples." He raised his hand in farewell, then urged Windwalker into a steady trot across the snow-covered prairie. Mary Catherine, John, Thomas stood in their doorway watching until horse and rider disappeared over the horizon, taking with them one of the most extraordinary experiences of their lives. That night, as they sat around their fire listening to Thomas retell the story of his adventure, Mary Catherine reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The blizzard that had threatened to destroy their family had instead brought them face to face with the humanity of their supposed enemies. Thomas would grow up with a very different understanding of the world than his parents had possessed, and perhaps that was the most important gift Sandstorm had given them. Years later, when Thomas was grown and had children of his own, he would still tell the story of the Comanche hunter who emerged from the white storm to save his life. And sometimes, when winter storms raged across the Texas frontier, travelers would report seeing a tall warrior on a painted horse guiding lost families to safety and shelter, as if some guardian spirit watched over those caught in the fury of nature's wrath.